Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Across the Pond podcast with me, Martin Cullen, the International Fellow at the Taxpayers Protection Alliance Consumer Centre, and the Director of the Consumer Centre, Lindsey Stroud. The idea being I'm in the UK, Lindsey's in America, so we're talking across the pond. And today we have a special guest, Christopher Snowdon, who is the Director of Lifestyle Economics Unit at the Institute of Economic Affairs in London. So good to see you, Chris.
Hello, Martin. I'm not actually in London. I'm at home here on the south coast, but yes, it's good to be on the show again.
The sun's come out, so you're
It
not
has.
working from home, yeah.
Well, finally, after 6 months, yeah, it's quite
Yeah.
nice out.
Right. You came to Panama with us for COP10, and you were one of our experts in our Good Cop conference event in the Central Hotel Panama. Do you want to just start off, give me your thoughts about what happened over there at COP10 and what your thoughts of our response to it with our conference?
Well, I don't really know what happened in the conference. Not that much, as far as I can see, and that's been the case pretty much every time I've followed this for over a decade. I guess things happen a bit incrementally, but it seems to happen sort of outside the conference. You know, the WHO's hardening line on e-cigarettes hasn't been, as far as I can tell, been kind of approved by the member states. They've just gone off and done it. You know, no one can stop the WHO from putting out a misleading web page or putting out some ludicrous tweets, which it did this week and got community noted, which was good, not for the first time. Probably a bit worrying if the world's main health organization is getting constantly corrected on Twitter. But anyway, so I don't know. I mean, it's, as I see it, you know, if not that much happens, it's a defensive win because clearly there are people who want things to happen. It is quite difficult, obviously, to get consensus. Not that there was much in the way of anyone trying to veto anything, but again, these things don't really happen, as far as I can tell, on the conference floor. You know, they don't really propose anything unless they know it's going to get through. It was good to see, was it the Philippines again? No, it wasn't even them. It was like St. Kitts and, well, who was it? Kind of put forward
Yeah,
a
St. Kitts and
proposal saying,
Nevis.
yeah,
St. Kitts and Nevis introduced Article 1.11D, didn't they? And they put together a proposal that they should take more. But Philippines mentioned harm reduction as well in their
yeah.
statement. So there was a few naysayers around.
Not the UK though, I noticed. Not the UK, despite the
No.
fact that one of the delegates was Martin Dockrell, who is supposedly a great harm reduction advocate and friend of the vapor. So yeah, it's kind of pathetic that the UK isn't standing up. But when you consider, and we'll come to this later in the show, you know, when we consider what's going on in the UK with vapes at the moment, maybe it's not that surprising. So yeah, in short, I think it was a defensive win because I actually did think this time that something would happen, that they've been kind of chomping at the bit for a few years. They've had a couple of conferences interrupted or cancelled because of COVID. So this is a big opportunity to really enshrine particularly an anti-vaping, but anti-harm reduction in general message into the WHO with the approval of member states. And they didn't get that or anything like it, as far as I can see. And they did get a little bit of opposition, albeit from like the smallest country in the world. So I think there'll be a lot of people at WHO disappointed with the way it went, and therefore I'm very pleased. As for the conference that you guys organised, I thought it was fantastic. I was really pleased that you did it. So 4 or 5 days of constant panel discussions about basically the same issue could have become very samey, but actually they were really good. I didn't get to all of them. I don't think anyone did, but you know, the ones I went to I thought were really interesting. Good. There's some fantastic people. Great to meet some new people. Great to meet people like Lindsey, who I hadn't done before, but knew online. And again, it's hard to say what impact he had. Obviously, it was great to see so many journalists over there, and there's been a lot of press about it, which there normally isn't. It's really hard to get people interested in the FCTC or the WHO, and especially anything to do with tobacco and vaping. Partly because it's not really legally binding. It's just statements and stuff like that. People don't realize the influence the WHO has. And if you're in a country like the US, which isn't even a signatory to it, or the UK, which isn't really going to be doing what the WHO tells it anytime soon, it doesn't feel like it really matters. But then you meet people from places like India, and you see how influential the WHO is. So just us being there helped. Speaking to the press definitely helped. And I believe there were some delegates from the conference, from the WHO conference popping their head around the door, so they knew we were there, and in a way, that's sufficient just to stamp your your presence on the thing and remind them that they they have a lot of opposition out there. So I was really pleased with the way it went.
Yeah, we got. Go on, carry on.
Sorry, Martin. In my opinion, I still think it was a win, seeing that they didn't have anything come out on tobacco harm reduction products or e-cigarettes, even though they had so many children, within the actual conference. It's always what's kind of really struck me is I think that we did a really good job conveying the messages of so many adults across the globe, that have been impacted by tobacco harm reduction products that the WHO refuses to acknowledge.
Yeah, we didn't have any children at our conference, so that was a win in itself.
No, not unless you count Martin.
Yeah.
But no, I agree. I said defensive win. Then they obviously didn't liberalize anything or suddenly come out pro harm reduction, but they didn't do anything. So I consider that a win.
Yes.
So firstly, I say we got the schedule, Lindsey for the schedule, to thank for the schedule because she put it together, and yeah, it was good that we found it interesting on that. But we're recording this on the day that the UK government has just announced or presented the Tobacco and Vapes Bill in Parliament today. Now it's been an incredible turnaround from this government, hasn't it? From just a few months ago when you had Neil O'Brien, Public Health Minister, was quite robust in sort of fighting against these activists coming up and trying to bombard him with all sorts of demands, and into all of a sudden this government has just caved into every single one of them. Do you want to give our watchers an idea of what's happening in the UK at the moment?
Well, the bigger picture is that we have a very unpopular prime minister and a very unpopular government, and an election coming up within the next 9 or 10 months max. And it's a very incompetent government that doesn't stand for anything or really know what it wants to do. It doesn't have any principles, and it doesn't even know what principles to pretend it has. It's completely out of touch. It doesn't really understand why people voted for them in 2019 in such large numbers. And so it flails around looking for policies that are somehow going to turn the tide, and the opinion polls just keep getting worse and worse for them. What's going on is, well, I guess there's two things. There's tobacco and vapes, right? So on the vapes, there is a legitimate kind of concern about underage vaping. There is a lot of underage vaping going on. And parents and teachers can see this. And, I've got a 12-year-old daughter. I don't want to get addicted to anything. I don't care how harmless or harmful it is. I just don't think it's good for people of that age getting into addictive substances. But people of her age are not getting in, by and large, not getting into drinking vodka or smoking cigarettes because they can't get hold of them, primarily. And they can't get hold of them because a lot of effort's gone into law enforcement over the years. And it's really hard, and yet it seems to be really easy to get hold of vapes. So there's a sort of moral panic, which is not entirely unfounded, around underage vaping, and the type of vapes that these kids are using is overwhelmingly disposables. In fact, disposables are overwhelmingly what most people are using. Incredibly, disposables make up 87% of the market by value, I guess that is, but a very large proportion. So what the government should have done, and what it originally said it was going to do, you mentioned Neil O'Brien there, like less than a year ago, it said we're going to put a lot of money into enforcement. Trading standards are not really chasing up on these dodgy corner shops selling dodgy vapes to kids. We're going to start doing spot checks and come down, hard on anyone who's breaking the law. That's what they should have done. And then suddenly, in end of September, early October, when the Tory party had their annual conference, Rishi Sunak, pretty much out of the blue, said, I want to ban disposable vapes, and I want to do something about packaging and flavors, and I'm also going to bring in this kind of Looney Tunes generational tobacco ban, which it's hard to know when to start with it. I mean, the idea is that the smoking age essentially rises by 1 year every year until there's no one old enough in the world to buy a cigarette. It's an idea from Jacinda Ardern. It was kind of her legacy idea, actually. It's like, we're going to have a smoke-free generation. And then she got booted out, and some kind of conservative parties took over in a coalition, and they said, actually, we're not going to do that because we've already got a big enough problem with people ram raiding tobacconists and corner shops without exacerbating it. And so we're going to focus on vaping, and they've been really successful in New Zealand with that approach. And of course, it's what the UK's approach should be if it's going to go for this arbitrary target of having 5% or fewer people smoking in the UK. But no, instead they've gone down the prohibitionist route with tobacco in this really weird and clearly unworkable way, which very quickly I think people will see once it's introduced and those kids start becoming adults, 1 year at a time. It's not going to take long at all, is it, before everybody says this is just preposterous. And of course the answer will not be let's repeal this stupid law. It will be let's ban everyone from smoking. And that will be finally, the closing phase, the crescendo of this long death by 1,000 cuts that smokers have been facing for the last 50 years. So yeah, you more or less at the same time, you're going to have two things happen. You're going to have this gradual prohibition of tobacco, and you're going to have the total prohibition of disposable vapes. What in effect will happen, and soon I could be long gone, probably back in America by then, is in a way the generational ban is kind of irrelevant. The price of cigarettes now is so high, and it's only going to get higher, that the market is very quickly shifting towards the illicit trade. This is not hyperbole or industry exaggeration. You only need to look at what cigarettes people are smoking if you go down the pub. The government has more or less given up trying to make any serious estimate of what the black market is for tobacco because it doesn't want to know. But you can see the collapse in legal cigarette sales. That's a clue. The cigarette sales are falling way faster than the smoking rates falling. But yeah, just look around you in a pub and see how many packs are not in plain packaging. We've got plain packaging in the UK. Very few other countries have. So by definition, if cigarettes or rolling tobacco is not in plain packaging, it's illicit, and it's a huge number, much more than the government says. It's losing control of the tobacco market, and now it's going to lose control of a very large part of the vape market because there's already a lot of illicit disposables in the UK. Very soon, old disposables are going to be illicit. People who are using them currently are not going to all give up. Some of them go back to smoking for sure. A few of them probably will give up vapes, but not many because they are not going to struggle to find disposable vapes, and it's all going to be on the black market. And in addition, I forgot, they've got a vape tax as well. So a little bottle of vape fluid, which if you're in America, you may not know, this is the largest bottle you're allowed to sell in the EU and the UK, 10 milliliters. Currently, I pay £3 for that, which I gather is actually over the odds. You can get them for as cheap as 75p. Anyway, there's going to be another £3.60 on that. So a bottle of vape juice that might cost £1 at the moment is soon going to cost £4.60. It's an absolute mess. But it looks like all of this is going to cruise through Parliament because, as I say, the Tories got no principles and they think this is popular.
Can I respond to that, Martin?
Yeah.
Okay, because like when you're talking about disposables and illicit disposables, I'm like, wait, in America, it's all illicit disposables. And you talked about dodgy corner shops, and I call them a different thing here. But as much as I'm not really appreciative of disposables for a lot of different reasons, I cannot deny their harm reduction potential. I think I've seen more people that have quit smoking using these products than any other, technological advancement. Even when we had flavored pod systems, I didn't see this many people. But also, since you brought up props, I got props too. This is my bottle of e-liquid, and you're right, it is 3 times the size as yours. It's 30 milliliters. And it's an illicit product technically in the United States just because of the way that we regulate it. The FDA is only authorized for sale 23 products that have been officially authorized. We've got thousands of products that are either in a regulatory limbo that the FDA hasn't either approved or denied are authorized or denied their product. And then you've got the courts that have came in and, came around based off of the FDA's actions, which again, why are other governments kind of following with what the FDA is doing, like outside of just changing the whole regulatory system the way that we have it, just trying to cut down on these products, not understanding it was our disposable, pod ban that really kind of created this disposable market.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like there aren't case studies like this for the UK government to look at. In public health, evidence just means some model that the campaigner put together showing that his hunch is correct about how policy is going to go. Evidence apparently doesn't include actual real world experience of actual countries who are actually bringing in these policies. So you have literally fire bombings happening nearly every day of tobacconists in Australia. This has not really made the news in the United Kingdom. It's quite big news in Australia, as you can imagine, because you have rampant war on drug style violence and arson, along with like an unbelievably big smuggling operation going on for tobacco and e-cigarettes. And yet our public health minister stands up and says, yeah, we haven't done a risk assessment into what happened with the illicit trade. But when we put the smoking age up from 16 to 18, it didn't seem to make much difference. I mean, come on. This is apples and oranges. It's just delusional. And part of me wonders whether the government would even be doing this if it didn't know it was going to get kicked out of office, because someone's going to have to pick up the pieces of this. And in a way, at this point, just say, bring it on. I'm very cynical about all this anyway. I always think it's a losing battle. And I always knew that some country somewhere would ban tobacco, quite possibly in this generational way. It's not even a new idea. I didn't think it'd be the UK, I have to say. I thought when it was New Zealand, I thought, yeah, that makes sense. Just rather than going to ban tobacco. But yeah, didn't think it would be a Conservative government in the UK. Didn't expect them to be. I thought if they tax vapes, it'd be like 50p a bottle, not £3.60. So everything has gone below even my extremely low expectations, and it's very depressing.
I think we saw, didn't we, Chris, when we were in Panama, an example of what happens when you ban.
Yeah, that's another example. Yeah.
Yeah. Was it 92% of the smoking market, I think, is illegal?
Smoking, yeah, tobacco, yeah, and the Department of Health advertises this on billboards on the side of the road for some reason, just to alert you to this fact. So yeah, I mean, we saw people selling, well, kids selling loose cigarettes. Seemed to be the only place you could actually buy cigarettes was from a child in the street. Disposable vapes being sold street corners, just on the sidewalk. Yeah, I mean, an absolute object lesson in prohibition not working. Another, many examples, past and present, showing that prohibition doesn't work, and yet people never seem to get the message, do they? Not just not work, but make things worse, right? That's the thing. It's not just, if you say prohibition doesn't work because some people are still buying the product, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't work. All laws are broken occasionally. The question is whether you're actively making the situation worse. Why are there more kids vaping in Australia, where vapes have never been legal, than they are in the UK, where until very recently they were actively encouraged?
That brings me up to a point that I had with a couple of other international people, Tim Andrews and Guy Bentley, when we were up in Rhode Island a few weeks ago for a state thing. We were talking about like cannabis in the United States and just cannabis weed culture in America, and that no other country really has that. And might have to do with the drinking age being 21 and the way that, when you start putting all these restrictions on the products, the way that they're now treated by risk-taking youth. I mean, I was one of those risk-taking youth. You're always going to have those kids. And a lot of times it's related to substances and the way that these substances are regulated for adult use.
Yeah, I think I've always thought that the fact that this drinking age is 21 and fairly well enforced is the reason there's so much cannabis smoking in America. Not that there isn't a fair bit of it in the UK, by the way. So amongst, can't remember what the age group is, 16 to 24-year-olds, I think, 16% of them smoke cannabis, a significantly higher rate than smoke cigarettes, right? Cannabis has been illegal for nearly a century in the UK. We have not created a cannabis-free generation, and yet Rishi Sunak is selling his ridiculous ban on the basis it's going to create a smoke-free generation. It isn't. I wouldn't even be surprised if smoking has something of a renaissance. Now that the effective price of a pack of cigarettes is £5, and there's a clear forbidden fruit element to kind of disobeying the Tories, it wouldn't surprise me greatly, but I don't see it certainly, obviously not leading to a smoke-free generation by any definition.
Yeah, well, I think really technically we've already got a smoke-free generation. They keep mentioning this, but isn't youth vaping in the UK down to about 1% or something? So we already have it. This bill doesn't seem to be doing anything that wasn't going to happen anyway. Well,
for 11 to 15-year-olds, I think that is, which is the traditional definition of underage smoking, because the smoking age not that long ago was 16. What's interesting about the way people like Ash and the government are selling this generational tobacco ban is like 10 years ago when they were fighting for plain packaging and other ineffective public health policy, they had a claim about, I can't remember what the figure was, 377 children aged 11 to 15 start smoking every day. This is probably a made up figure, but let's go with it. It doesn't really matter. Now, the claim is that 350 18 to 25-year-olds start smoking every day. But those people, by definition, are adults, right? So there's so little underage smoking going on that they have to ban adults from smoking, essentially. So that's like the idea that tobacco control was ever about kids. It was ever about, we stop kids smoking, because the belief was, wasn't it, that if you stop people smoking until they're 18, they won't smoke. This was based on the observation that most people started smoking before they were 18. But the further you push it back, the older people are going to start smoking, right? If you couldn't drink, let's imagine that you weren't allowed to drink and the law was somehow totally enforced. You couldn't drink until you're 25. Do you think a lot of people would start drinking when they're 25? Yeah, they would, and probably is the same number of people who drink now. The fact of the matter is people actually start drinking way before the age of 18, even probably in America. So yes, statistically, people start drinking and smoking before the age of 18. That's not even true of smoking anymore in the UK. Most people now start smoking at 18 or over. And that should really be the end of the campaign, the end of the crusade. It's like, okay, we stopped kids smoking. That's great. It's been a miracle, really, because we can't do that with all sorts of other things like gambling and drinking and, lots of other age-restricted activities, with most people who watch an 18 certificate film are well below the age of 18, right? But somehow we've managed to do it. So the majority of people are actually holding off from even having one cigarette until they're 18. That should be the end of the crusade, because it never is the end of the crusade, because of mission creep, and these guys need to keep fighting, and also they're fanatics. So they're explicitly saying we need to ban the sale of tobacco completely because people aged between 18 and 25 are taking it up. They didn't even want to ban it completely when most people started smoking between the age of 11 and 15. So it's just not about kids, is it? Well, it never was.
Yeah, well, again, Chris Whitty on World at One today was denying that you make the choice to start vaping or smoking anyway. He said it's an addiction, and he
Well, you make the choice, surely. I mean, you're not addicted to it before you start using it.
Yeah,
right.
That's the point he was making. That if we stop people, then they won't start and they won't get addicted, and it's not freedom of choice. He was talking about these Conservative MPs who are supposedly opposed to the policy, and he said no, it's not a freedom of choice issue. He said it's addiction.
It's just, this is public health dogma, and I guess these people say it so much to each other that they end up believing it. The reality is, of all the people alive in Britain who've ever smoked, 70% of them are now non-smokers. Right? Now, I'm not saying nicotine isn't addictive. I'm highly addicted to it. I vape, and it doesn't bother me at all. And the only problem I've ever had for being addicted to nicotine is people trying to stop me doing it. I'm very happy to be addicted to nicotine. You can enjoy something and be addicted to it. In fact, people are never addicted to things they don't enjoy. People don't get addicted to doing the washing up or something like that. They get addicted to drink and drugs and enjoyable things that have a stimulating effect on the dopamine system or whatever. So yeah, this excuse about addiction is just that. It's an excuse. And as various people in the harm reduction movement have pointed out, technically the definition of addiction has to involve harm, right? Something is not actually, as I understand it, something is not technically addictive unless it's causing you harm. There are various other reasons to say that nicotine isn't technically addictive. For example, you don't need to take more and more of it. Generally speaking, addictions require you to take more and more of the substance to get the same effects. That doesn't happen with nicotine. Yeah, I think you can accept that there is an element of nicotine consumption where people's freedom of choice is not as clear-cut as it would be from doing lots of other things. There's no doubt about it. There are lots of people who really struggle giving up smoking and do vaping. The question is, what is the bigger restriction on choice? Nicotine, which most people actually give up, and there are loads of less harmful ways of taking it now anyway, or prohibition, right? Which is the biggest infringement of choice between those two things? So it's just a kind of childish diversionary tactic from Whitty, who's a dreadful man, by the way.
Actually,
Yeah. Go on, Lindsay. Sorry.
well, I think actually when you brought up this, addiction, it's a bad thing when it's bad for you, but I guess maybe we should be reframing it from nicotine addiction to nicotine dependency. I mean, I've seen pharma use those kind of terminologies when they were talking about opioids, for example, in the 90s, when patients were getting physically addicted to or physically dependent on these. Again, it seems because it's nicotine, there's just this demonization that's now going on, and where public health, the people that are responsible for trying to protect the people from the harms related to smoking, are refusing to acknowledge, these products that can deliver nicotine to satisfy somebody's dependency on it in a less harmful manner.
Yeah, I mean, nicotine has been demonized, having gone through this brief period of being kind of rehabilitated when GlaxoSmithKline and Johnson & Johnson were producing it. It was then literally advertised as being soothing and therapeutic nicotine. So there was this brief period in the 90s and early noughties when a lot of people, even in public health, including the WHO, who at that time were taking money from these companies, they were saying, yeah, nicotine actually isn't that bad, and we've got to get away from this kind of caricature. But now, of course, they've gone completely the other direction. And there's all this bullshit about nicotine like changes your brain and it causes all these terrible things that have never been noticed in the 500 years that Westerners have been using nicotine in very large quantities. But yeah, apparently it makes you stupid, just like Einstein.
Okay, we're sort of running out of time, but here's probably a last question for you. As I've mentioned a few times in Colester Dumas's book, Enemies of Innovation, he talks about how just the fight for coffee, the acceptance of people drinking coffee, took about 300 years. So there have always been prohibitionists who hate any kind of drug use. But now, obviously, you can have coffee wherever you go. They almost shove it down your throat. I'd say that's someone who doesn't drink coffee. So do you think at any time in the future there might be a point where people do understand that nicotine is just a benign drug and people should be allowed to take it in a safer way, like pouches and that? Or do you think we're always going to have this public health lobby stigmatizing any use of it?
I mean, the honest answer is I don't know. It's not looking very likely at the moment, is it, that things are going to get better? But obviously things can change. What is going to be required to bring about change at the moment, I have no idea. Either it would take a kind of philosophical revolution. You'd have to have a new generation of people come through who just are sick of the puritanical millennials and just want to enjoy themselves. Or, and these two are not mutually exclusive, but you could end up with such a mess of the kind of extension of the war on drugs to nicotine, which is what's happening, that there is a revolt and a reaction against that. I mean, I think it's kind of inevitable now that we will have the nicotine market in general going black. I mean, it will be mainly a criminal activity, as it already is in Australia and partially in America, and very soon partially in the UK. It's a risky thing to hope for. I mean, I don't actually hope for it. I just think it's inevitable. It'd be a risky strategy to hope for anyway, because the war on drugs itself has shown that people can put up with a huge amount of evidence of catastrophic failure and still not revert, back to how things were before. So as I said before, I'm very pessimistic about things in general. In 200 years, what you're saying is more than possible. I don't think it's going to happen probably in the next 20.
Okay, great. Well, have you got anything, Lindsay, or do you want to wrap up?
I'll let you wrap it up.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for watching. Thanks very much, Chris, for coming along and giving us some of your time. So for anyone, we've had quite a few of these recently. We've got more planned. So I hope to see you again at the next Across the Pond podcast with me and Lindsay.
Podcast, you should call it that.
Podcast. We do amongst ourselves, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and see you next time.